My name is Bianca Brown. Can I click on? Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here today to take you through Gen Z as Gen Z. I'm 26 years old. I'm literally a child, so be nice to me. I'm just a girl. But I am a digital advisory specialist at Edelman. We are a global PR firm, comms agency, and I'm also a UK ambassador for our Gen Z Lab, which is a solution at our agency that helps to demystify the generation, helps to explain it, understand it, translate their language, my language, and help our clients to get through a sticky, sort of complex, quite confusing generation at times. My sort of key takeaway is, yes, they're very confusing. You're not feeling incorrectly, but there are ways to understand them. To talk about why we've been doing this, we from our clients hear a lot about Gen Z being extremely hostile at times. They can be quite quick to cancel a brand. That idea of brand loyalty was a big one we heard as well. But again, the data shows yes, this is true, but I can help, I promise. And what we're witnessing is a great divide amongst Gen Z. It's no longer sufficient to say in any sort of brief or a communications campaign that I want to reach Gen Z. That doesn't mean anything anymore. We're seeing a great schism between elder Gen Z and younger Gen Z. And from our trust barometer in 2025, in January of this year, we saw really interesting, quite provocative statistics about this. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to be quick, and hopefully you have good questions for me. But what I want to sort of establish for us in the beginning is this idea of grievance, okay? We had our previous perceptions about Gen Z, who they are and what they believed, and they seem to be this sort of greatly united global generation, all for social justice, really looking to work together, share values. But what we're seeing in our most recent data from the Trust Barometer is that this has greatly changed. They're becoming this sort of very dispersed generation, and we've characterized them with this phrase, this word grievance, okay? They're really an aggrieved generation. And how we define that in the Trust Barometer is that they hold a sense of grievance because they see that businesses and government serve a select few. They say that businesses and government, their actions hurt me personally. They say that the system favors the rich and that the rich are getting richer. So there's this real sort of personal feeling and personal distaste towards large institutions and a real insularity that's growing amongst Gen Z. 58% of Gen Z globally said that their grievance was moderate or higher, which is quite a stark stat. Obviously, you knew I was going to say this. COVID has had a massive impact on Gen Z, but it's so true, okay? These are a generation who came of age in a world that was completely foreign to absolutely everyone. And this obviously is having impacts that we don't even know yet. But what we've seen so far is that COVID is creating a very isolated and lonely generation of young adults. 43% of our global stats say that they felt left behind and angry due to the way the powerful and the rich acted during the pandemic. Really powerful emotions coming out in that data. And then finally, 61% of young adults saying that they felt genuine economic stress because of the pandemic. I think it's so interesting to think about how such young people could worry so much about money. But that's been a real consistent through line through our research from Gen Z this year and the impacts of COVID, that in the full length of this report, which I can share with you if you want to read it, we go into a lot of detail about the financial impact on Gen Z as they grow into spending power. The oldest Gen Z, to caveat, that we measure in the Trust Barometer is around 29 years old, and the youngest around 13. So greatly different life stages, but you're really seeing towards the older end, people who are entering the workforce, growing, starting families, and so have a completely different financial position than younger Gen Z. Yes, so the pressure that they're facing is compounding, okay? One of my stats has disappeared there, but in the high 70s, you can see that Gen Z are increasingly worried about paying their bills, about how they can keep up in this economy, and finding that they're really concerned about climate change. There's a variety of issues that they're feeling, and it's all weighing down on them when they're supposed to be feeling young, free, and fun. They are worried, they are scared, and they are confused. They don't know what to do, and all of these things are happening at the same time. Obviously, an additional factor to this is AI, okay? Gen Z in our stats say that they are really high users of AI actually, but they're finding that their response to it is quite a dichotomy. So half of workers that we surveyed said that they would rather ask AI a question than ask their manager. I wouldn't personally agree, but the data says what it says. This really, really quite scary stat to me of 41% saying they trust AI more than humans is fascinating. I think it's hilarious, personally. But also the conflict that we see between that stat and the rest of it, saying that they say it makes them anxious in equal measure, that they're worrying it's undermining their critical thinking, that they're struggling to process thoughts because they can just go to AI, and that AI is providing emotional support for Gen Z in ways that are quite alarming. I know you must have heard of people going through, AI psychosis and things like this, something that we're seeing in increasing measure. It's quite a worrying stat to say that those two realities are living amongst each other. But what we see in general is that the generation is going from this extremely united generation, from a very sort of collective group, from a we to a me. And so this homogeny that used to be a strength of the generation and a characteristic of them is really turning on its head, and they're starting to display such a variety of contradictions and things that we are starting to see as a conflict. Here are a few of those contradictions that we're seeing. So the first one, big advocates of mental health and looking after your mental health, but at the same time, they're taking time off work because of poor mental health. In the middle, we see that American Gen Zers are really worried about the climate crisis, but once a month, they will shop at Shein. It doesn't make any sense, I know. And then at the end, Gen Z is saying that they're concerned with data privacy. But at the end, they're also saying that 88% will be like, oh, I'll share a bit of data, you know, if it improves my algorithm, you can have my data, it's fine. Give me the good content, take my data. Great contradictions that we're seeing, really interesting to dig into as well. But what we're seeing is that this disparity is so important to notice, okay? What we've labeled it as Edelman is Gen Z 1.0, which is our older Gen Z, who are still quite trusting of the grander institution of brands and systems. They're still influenced by these powers. And this younger Gen Z, who's not quite alpha, but is on the other end of Gen Z, they're younger, they're a bit more skeptical, a bit more sort of questioning and trusting, and they actually feel like they're doing a lot better than the older Gen Z, which is another interesting stat we see. They are sort of disparate in that way, but the one thing that unites them is this distrust of institution. It's just the current system is not working for them. This idea of grievance is really quite worrying when we see this stat that came out of the trust barometer. More than half of Gen Z said that they have a zero-sum mindset, meaning helping you is actively disadvantaging me. Complete 180 from how we used to perceive Gen Z, and really interesting when we think about how this makes them respond to brands, to society in general. And so we see some of the quotes that came through. That top one said 50% of US Gen Z said they have very little trust in Congress. The second stat is for Hong Kong. They said there are better systems than democracy. Interesting stat from them. And then in the last one was all of Southeast Asia that says medical practitioners are a reliable source of health information. Less than half said that that was the case. And so in general, we're seeing again that trust in institution is super low and quite concerning. So 3 things that I want to take away, to leave with you, it's for you to take away, I already know this. The first one, fear. Fear characterizes this generation, okay? The world is growing ever more unstable, and so what Gen Z are really calling out for is safety, security. How can brands and business make me feel safe? And so what we try to tell people is that trust is built up close and personal, okay? They're not expecting every brand to get it right all the time. The sort of culture of cancellation hasn't completely disappeared, but there is an expectation to show up, to listen, to engage on a level with them, and to help them to rebuild the community that they feel that has been quite eroded by COVID and such and the like. We see that there's this sort of how can I describe it, onslaught of information, and they sort of don't know where to turn. Everything's quite scary, quite dire. And so they're really looking for brands as one of the most trusted institutions compared to media, government, etc., to provide community, to help rebuild and introduce safety. The second one, misinformation, okay? Content is unverified. Algorithms are endless. Scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. What is true? What do I trust? This is the feeling amongst Gen Z. And so what their response to this is that I have to trust in a different way. The pathways to building trust, as Al spoke about, are completely different. The pathways to scaling brands are completely different with this Gen Z. And they've shifted the sort of power dynamic now. What we're seeing is that they don't look up to institution, to authority, to receive their information and to grow loyalty. They have this lateral view. So they're looking to their peers, they're looking to friends, they're looking to creators and influencers to give them what they need to sort of, to adopt, to change, to grow and identify with. And so they're looking for people who really understand them. This is a really key space for brands because brands can really help them to adopt identity markers. If they're finding it with their friends, could they also maybe find it with your brand? Finally, disconnection. I think with Gen Z, an interesting point to know is that while they are super digitally native and while they live and breathe online and social, they are really seeking connection. They are really seeking community. This is something that we see coming up in all of our data. And while it seems like the digitally native generation is happy to live there, it often feels like a distraction for them. It's almost a bit too much. And so sometimes their entertainment hobbies is not immune to this idea of grievance. So how can we think about reflecting their culture without necessarily trying to shift it? How do you strike that balance of embracing the digitally native, but still offering the community that they seek? We know that they don't trust institutions, but we do know that they trust the communities that they're always in, the ecosystems they're operating in. Instagram are changing the way that they act by moving their interaction to DMs now instead of the feed. How can we make sure that what we're creating, our communication, feels very personal, feels very community driven, to again introduce that safety for Gen Z and go to where they are, even in the multi-channel system that we're talking about. Okay, so that was a whistle-stop tour through the data. It definitely wasn't all of it, but I wanted to paint the picture of grievance for you for Gen Z. And I'm really excited to hear from the rest of our speakers about some more.